Lyra Starweaver noticed it first during her night shift aboard the exploration vessel Moon Whisper. The communications board that usually buzzed with constant chatter from the Sol system showed nothing but empty static. She stared at the blank display for several minutes, her pointed ears twitching with confusion. For the past 50 years of monitoring human transmissions, Earth had never gone quiet, not even for an hour. She pressed the scanner controls again, searching through all the frequencies humans typically used: radio waves, quantum signals, even their crude electromagnetic broadcasts that leaked into space from their entertainment systems. Nothing came through except the cold silence of empty space. Lyra felt a strange chill run down her spine, despite the warm temperature of the ship. The Scifi had been watching humanity for decades with a mixture of fascination and concern. Humans were loud, chaotic, and completely unpredictable compared to every other species in the galaxy. Where the elven Scifi preferred careful planning and ancient wisdom, humans seemed to make decisions based on wild emotions and sudden impulses. Where the telepathic Zephyrians shared thoughts in orderly mental networks, humans argued and fought and somehow still managed to work together. It made no sense to any civilized species, yet somehow it worked for them. Lyra had spent years studying their transmissions, learning their languages, and trying to understand their bizarre culture. She knew their music, their stories, their constant debates about everything from politics to what food tasted best. The silence felt wrong in a way that made her stomach twist with worry. She activated the ship's communication system and sent a priority message to the Galactic Communications Network. Within an hour, responses flooded in from monitoring stations across the galaxy. The Zephyrian collective confirmed that their telepaths could no longer sense the chaotic but vibrant mental signatures that always came from human space. The crystalline Valdani reported that their quantum sensors detected no human biosignatures anywhere in the Sol system. Most disturbing of all, the automated trading posts that humans had established throughout nearby systems had also gone completely silent. Commander Zara Vex of the Zephyrian military was the first to respond to Lyra's report with something other than confusion. Her telepathic message arrived sharp and clear in Lyra's mind, carrying undertones of genuine alarm. Zara had been monitoring human military communications for strategic purposes, and she knew their patterns better than anyone. According to her analysis, every human ship, station, and colony had stopped transmitting at exactly the same moment, 3 months ago. Not gradually, not in any pattern that suggested technical failure or attack. They had simply all gone silent at once. The implications terrified every species that heard the news. In all of galactic history, no entire civilization had ever just vanished. Species had been destroyed by wars, consumed by plagues, or wiped out by natural disasters. But there were always signs, always some trace left behind. Complete simultaneous silence from an entire species was impossible. Emergency sessions began immediately in the Galactic Council chambers. Representatives from dozens of worlds gathered to discuss what could have happened to humanity. The theories ranged from practical to ridiculous. Some suggested a massive solar flare had destroyed their technology. Others proposed that humans had discovered faster-than-light travel and simply left the galaxy. A few worried that some unknown enemy had attacked and completely destroyed every human settlement without leaving any evidence. Lyra found herself thinking about the humans she had studied for so many years. She remembered their stories about never giving up, about fighting impossible odds, about protecting others even when it meant sacrificing themselves. These were not people who would simply disappear without a trace unless something extraordinary had forced them to do so. The more she thought about it, the more convinced she became that they needed to investigate directly. Sending long-range scanners and automated probes would take too long and might miss important details. Someone needed to travel to Earth and see what had actually happened there. When she proposed leading a reconnaissance mission to the Sol system, the Council's response surprised her. Instead of the careful deliberation she expected from galactic politics, they approved her request within hours. The urgency in their decision told her that everyone was more worried about humanity's disappearance than they wanted to admit. Zara Vex volunteered to join the mission, bringing with her a team of Zephyrian tactical officers and their most advanced scanning equipment. Dr. Kes Valdani, a crystalline entity whose silicon-based brain could process data faster than any organic computer, also requested assignment to the expedition. Within days, they had assembled a small but capable fleet of ships equipped with the best technology each species could provide. As the Moon Whisper prepared to jump toward Earth, Lyra Lai stood in the observation deck looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, an entire species had vanished without explanation. The humans who had filled the galaxy with their noise, their chaos, their strange but somehow effective ways of solving problems, were simply gone. She wondered what they would find when they reached the Sol system. Part of her hoped they would discover some simple explanation, some technical problem that could be fixed to bring the humans back. But a deeper part of her, the part that had studied human nature for decades, suspected they were about to uncover something much more significant and much more disturbing than anyone in the galaxy was prepared to face. The reconnaissance fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, and immediately every sensor on every ship began reporting impossible readings. Earth was there, blue and green and beautiful as always, rotating peacefully in its orbit around the yellow star. The moon hung in its proper place, and all the human orbital stations maintained their positions exactly as they should. Everything looked completely normal except for one terrifying detail. There were no life signs anywhere. Lyra stared at the scanner displays in disbelief. The readings showed that every human city was fully powered, with lights glowing in windows, and traffic systems operating normally. Automated systems continued their work as if nothing had changed. But the biological scanners that should have detected millions of human heartbeats found nothing but empty space where people should have been. Captain Nina Torres, the Zephyrian tactical officer, ran deep scans of the entire system while her telepathic abilities searched for any trace of human consciousness. Her mental probes found the same result as the technological scanners. The chaotic but vibrant energy that human minds always projected was completely absent. It was as if every person had simply stopped existing while leaving their entire civilization running on automatic. Dr. Kes Valdani processed the sensor data with her crystalline brain, analyzing patterns and searching for explanations. Her silicon-based intelligence could examine thousands of possibilities simultaneously, but every theory she tested led to the same impossible conclusion. The humans had not been destroyed, not been killed, and not been forced to leave. They had vanished in a way that suggested careful planning and voluntary departure. The fleet moved closer to Earth, and the mystery only deepened. Lyra led a landing team to the surface, choosing to investigate New York City because it had always been one of the busiest human settlements. What they found there challenged everything they thought they knew about how civilizations functioned. The city was pristine and perfectly maintained. Cars sat parked along streets with their doors unlocked and keys still in the ignition. Restaurants had tables set for meals that were never eaten, with food still fresh in refrigerators as if the owners had just stepped out for a moment. Office buildings showed signs of normal work activity, with computers still running and projects half finished on desks. But nowhere could they find any indication of struggle, panic, or forced evacuation. In the residential areas, the pattern continued in ways that made no logical sense. Homes showed signs of careful preparation rather than hasty departure. Clothes were folded neatly in closets. Personal items were arranged as if their owners intended to return, and many houses had notes left on kitchen tables with instructions for maintaining gardens and caring for pets. The pets themselves were gone, along with their owners, but automatic feeding systems had been programmed to continue operating indefinitely. Nina discovered something even stranger when she investigated the city's transportation systems. Every form of human travel, from cars to trains to aircraft, showed signs of coordinated movement toward specific gathering points rather than random evacuation. The traffic cameras that were still recording showed massive but orderly movements of people, all heading in the same directions at the same time. But the destinations appeared to be empty fields and parks where nothing remained except some unusual geometric patterns burned into the ground. Dr. Valdani analyzed these patterns with her advanced processing capabilities and found that they matched no known technology used by any galactic civilization. The energy signatures suggested some form of mass teleportation or dimensional shifting, but on a scale that should have been impossible even for the most advanced species. The humans had somehow moved their entire population using technology that exceeded anything in the galactic database. Lyreley found the first real clue in what appeared to be a government building in the center of the city, hidden in a secure vault that had been left deliberately unlocked. She discovered data storage devices containing encrypted files about something called Project Exodus. The encryption was sophisticated but not impossible to break, and when they finally accessed the files, they revealed a shocking truth about human activities over the past several decades. The documents showed that humanity had been secretly preparing for mass evacuation for over 30 years. They had been gathering resources, developing new technologies, and training their entire population for something they called the Convergence Protocol. But the files gave no clear explanation of why they were preparing to leave or where they intended to go. More disturbing were the agricultural reports from human farming worlds throughout the system. Dr. Valdani's analysis showed that crop production had been dramatically accelerated in the months before the disappearance. Decades' worth of food had been harvested and processed using methods that compressed normal growing cycles into impossibly short time periods. The humans had not just been planning to leave, they had been preparing to sustain their entire population for an extended period away from their homeworlds. The final piece of evidence came from Nina's investigation of human military installations. Every base showed signs of careful shutdown rather than abandonment, with weapons and equipment secured but not destroyed. More significantly, she found records indicating that the human military had been conducting secret operations in deep space, far beyond the edges of known galactic civilization. These operations had apparently been going on for years, without any other species detecting them. As the investigation team prepared to return to their ships, Lyreley made one last discovery that changed everything they thought they understood about the situation. In what appeared to be a memorial garden in the center of the city, she found a crystalline device that had been left specifically for galactic observers. The device activated when she approached it, projecting a holographic message from a human woman who identified herself as Ambassador Claire Murphy. The message was brief but terrifying in its implications. Ambassador Murphy explained that humanity had discovered something approaching from beyond the galaxy, something that threatened every form of life they had encountered. The humans had not fled from this threat, the message revealed, but had positioned themselves to face it directly. They had evacuated their homeworlds not out of fear, but to prepare for a battle that they believed would determine the survival of all galactic civilization. The message ended with coordinates to a location far beyond the edge of known space and a warning that chilled every member of the investigation team. The humans were asking the galaxy not to follow them, not because they wanted to abandon their allies, but because they were going to face something so dangerous that they did not want to risk anyone else being caught in the conflict. The message concluded with a promise that they would return if they succeeded, and a request that the galaxy remember them if they did not. The coordinates from Ambassador Murphy's message led the fleet beyond anything they had ever imagined possible. For 3 weeks, they traveled through regions of space that appeared on no galactic charts, following navigation data that pushed their ships to the very limits of their range. Lyreley found herself wondering how the humans had managed to travel so far from their home worlds without any other species detecting their movements. When they finally reached the designated location, what they discovered made every crew member question everything they thought they knew about human capabilities. Spread across a region of space larger than most solar systems was the most massive military deployment any of them had ever seen. Millions of human ships arranged in perfect formations, with vessels ranging from small fighters to enormous battleships. That dwarfed anything in the galactic fleet databases. The human fleet was positioned at what appeared to be the very edge of their galaxy, facing outward toward the empty darkness of intergalactic space. Dr. Valdani's sensors detected energy, signatures from weapons and defensive systems that operated on principles she could not identify. The technology was clearly human in origin, but it was far more advanced than anything the Galactic Intelligence Services believed humans possessed. As the reconnaissance fleet approached, they received a communication from the human forces that surprised them with its warmth and professionalism. Admiral Vera Cross, commanding the human fleet from a massive vessel called the Unity, welcomed them to what she described as humanity's greatest undertaking. Her transmission carried none of the fear or desperation they might have expected from a species facing an unknown threat. Admiral Cross invited representatives from each ship to come aboard the Unity for a full briefing about the situation. Lyrelai, Nina, and Dr. Valdani accepted the invitation, curious to finally understand what had driven humanity to take such extraordinary actions. What they learned during that meeting changed their perception of humans forever. The briefing room aboard the Unity was filled with holographic displays showing detailed analyses of something approaching from beyond their galaxy. Dr. Beth Morgan, a human quantum physicist, explained that their deep space monitoring systems had detected what appeared to be an entity of enormous size and power moving between galaxies and consuming everything in its path. The entity did not simply destroy civilizations, she revealed, but seemed to absorb and incorporate them into itself, growing larger and more capable with each galaxy it encountered. According to Dr. Morgan's calculations, the entity would reach their galaxy within a matter of months, and when it arrived, it would systematically consume every star system, every planet, and every form of life it encountered. The humans had discovered this threat purely by accident while conducting experiments with long-range quantum sensors, and they had been preparing to face it ever since. Sister Kaylin Voss, a Zephyrian psych warrior who had joined the briefing, attempted to probe the edges of the approaching entity with her telepathic abilities. What she sensed made her recoil in horror and disbelief. The entity was not just large and powerful. It was intelligent in a way that defied comprehension. More terrifying still, it seemed to learn and adapt from every civilization it encountered, becoming more effective at conquering each new galaxy it reached. Admiral Cross explained why humanity had chosen to face this threat alone rather than warning the galactic civilizations and asking for help. Every species they had studied followed logical, predictable patterns in their military strategies and decision-making processes. The entity appeared to be incredibly effective at analyzing and countering such orderly approaches to warfare. Humans, with their chaotic and emotionally driven behavior, represented the only wild card that might be able to surprise and confuse something that had successfully consumed dozens of other galaxies. The human fleet had been gathering ships and resources for over 30 years, secretly building weapons and developing tactics that deliberately ignored conventional military wisdom. Dr. Morgan showed them examples of human battle plans that made no logical sense but had proven effective in simulated combat against opponents who adapted quickly to standard strategies. The humans were preparing to fight using controlled chaos, emotional decision-making, and deliberately irrational tactics. Lyrelai found herself both impressed and terrified by the scope of human preparation. They had not simply assembled a military force. They had transformed their entire civilization into a weapon designed specifically to fight an enemy that conventional warfare could not defeat. Every human civilian had been trained in combat techniques, every ship had been equipped with experimental weapons, and their entire population had volunteered for what they knew would likely be a suicide mission. The most shocking revelation came when Admiral Cross showed them the human evacuation plans. The removal of humanity from their home worlds had not been about preserving their species, but about ensuring that the entity could not learn about human tactics by studying their civilization. They had deliberately made themselves appear to have vanished mysteriously, hoping that the entity would not realize what kind of opposition it would face until the battle had already begun. As the briefing continued, alarms began sounding throughout the Unity. The entity had arrived early, emerging from intergalactic space ahead of all human calculations. Through the observation windows, they could see something that challenged their understanding of what was possible in the universe. The approaching entity was larger than star systems, dark and writhing with energy that seemed to bend space around itself. As it moved, it left behind empty void where galaxies had once existed. Admiral Cross activated fleet-wide communications and addressed her forces with calm determination. She explained that this was the moment they had all prepared for, the reason they had sacrificed everything familiar and comfortable about their lives. The human fleet began moving into attack formation with a precision that impressed even experienced military observers like Nina Torres. The last thing Admiral Cross said before ending the briefing shocked the galactic representatives more than anything else they had heard. She thanked them for coming to witness what humanity was about to do, and asked them to carry word back to the galaxy about the sacrifice humans were prepared to make. Then she politely but firmly requested that they leave immediately, because what was about to happen would be too dangerous for anyone except those who had specifically prepared for this type of warfare. As the reconnaissance fleet pulled back, to a safe distance, Lyrelei watched the human forces advance toward an enemy that seemed impossible to defeat. She realized that humanity had not fallen silent because they were running away or because they had been destroyed. They had gone quiet because they were preparing to do something that no other species in galactic history had ever attempted. Fight a war against the impossible, using the very traits that made other species consider them dangerous and unpredictable. For the first time since discovering the empty human worlds, Lyrelei felt something that surprised her. She felt hope. The battle began in ways that defied every principle of warfare known to galactic civilization. The reconnaissance fleet watched from a safe distance as human forces engaged the massive entity using tactics that appeared to be completely suicidal. Small groups of fighters launched direct attacks against sections of the entity that were thousands of times larger than their ships, while larger vessels seemed to deliberately expose themselves to enemy fire in patterns that made no strategic sense. Captain Rosa Martinez led the first wave of attacks, commanding a squadron of modified human destroyers that charged directly into the entity's defensive fields. Any logical military analysis would have predicted the complete destruction of her forces within minutes, but somehow her ships not only survived, but managed to inflict significant damage. The entity's attempts to adapt to their attack patterns failed because Rosa's tactics changed every few seconds based on what appeared to be pure emotional impulse rather than calculated strategy. Lyrelei monitored the communications between human ships and found herself amazed by what she heard. Instead of the calm, professional coordination she expected from military forces, the humans were arguing, joking, and making decisions based on sudden hunches and emotional reactions. When conventional wisdom suggested retreat, they attacked harder. When logic demanded careful planning, they acted on instinct. It was chaos, but it was chaos that somehow worked. General Amanda Pierce coordinated ground assault teams that had been launched from specialized transport ships toward the entity's surface. The idea of conducting ground operations against something that existed in the vacuum of space should have been impossible. But the humans had developed technology that allowed their soldiers to fight directly on the entity's outer shell. Pierce's forces used weapons and tactics that seemed designed more for causing confusion than maximum damage, yet they consistently managed to disrupt the entity's attempts to coordinate its defenses. Dr. Valdani analyzed the battle data with her crystalline intelligence and began to understand what the humans were accomplishing. The entity appeared to learn by absorbing and processing information about its opponents, then developing countermeasures based on predicted behavior patterns against logical, organized military forces. This ability made it nearly invincible. But human forces acted in ways that generated so much contradictory data that the entity could not form stable predictions about what they would do next. Sister. Kaylin attempted to monitor the entity's mental state through her telepathic abilities and discovered something that filled her with both hope and terror. The creature's vast intelligence was becoming confused and frustrated by its inability to understand human behavior. For the first time in its existence across multiple galaxies, it was facing opponents who did not follow patterns that could be analyzed and countered. The chaos of human decision-making was actually causing the entity psychological damage. As the battle continued, more human fleets arrived from hidden positions throughout the region. Admiral Cross had apparently prepared multiple waves of attacks, each using different combinations of logical military strategy and deliberate chaos. Some fleets employed traditional tactical formations to draw the entity's attention, while others launched seemingly random attacks that kept it from adapting to any single approach. The most impressive display came from a group of human ships, commanded by Captain Lisa Kane, who had been conducting deep space research when Earth first went silent. Her vessels carried experimental weapons that operated on principles that even Dr. Valdani could not understand. When these weapons fired, they seemed to cause damage that spread through the entity in ways that defied conventional physics, as if the attacks were targeting the creature's ability to maintain its own coherence rather than simply destroying its physical structure. Nina Torres coordinated communication between the Galactic Reconnaissance Fleet and the human forces, relaying tactical information and updates about the battle's progress. What impressed her most was the way human commanders made decisions based on incomplete information and emotional intuition, yet somehow consistently chose actions that proved effective against an enemy that should have been able to predict and counter their every move. The entity began showing signs of genuine distress as the human attacks continued. Its movements became less coordinated, and its defensive responses grew increasingly desperate rather than calculated. Dr. Morgan's voice came through on fleet communications, explaining that their strategy was working better than they had hoped. The entity's intelligence was designed to consume and integrate ordered civilizations, but it had no framework for dealing with opponents who embraced controlled chaos as a weapon. However, the cost of the battle was becoming clear as human ships were destroyed by the thousands. The entity might have been confused and damaged, but it was still incredibly powerful, and human forces were taking massive casualties with every attack. Admiral Cross acknowledged these losses in her communications, but emphasized that every human volunteer had understood the stakes when they agreed to participate in this final confrontation. The decisive moment came when General Pierce's ground teams managed to penetrate deep into the entity's core structure. Using information gathered from the surface battles, they had identified what appeared to be the creature's central processing centers. Pierce led a team of volunteers in a direct assault on these vital areas, knowing that success would likely mean their own destruction, but that failure would doom every galaxy the entity might encounter in the future. As Pierce's team reached their target, Admiral Cross activated what she called the quantum trap, a device that had been secretly prepared as humanity's ultimate weapon against the entity. The trap was designed to contain and destroy the creature by collapsing the space around it into a controlled singularity, but activating it would also destroy everything within several light years of the entity's position, including the entire human fleet. Cross's final transmission to the Galactic Reconnaissance Fleet was broadcast on all frequencies, so that every species monitoring the battle would hear her words. She explained that humanity had always known this confrontation would require the ultimate sacrifice, and that they considered it an honor to give their lives to protect the galaxy that had been their home. She asked only that the other species remember what humans had done and that they learn from human tactics in case similar threats ever appeared in the future. The quantum trap activated with a burst of energy that temporarily blinded every sensor in the region. When the light faded and the energy dissipated, both the entity and the human fleet had vanished, leaving behind only empty space and the echo of Admiral Cross's final message. The threat that had consumed dozens of galaxies had been stopped, but the price had been the complete sacrifice of the species that had saved everyone else. 6 months after the battle, Lyrali stood in what had once been the busiest communication center in the galaxy, now transformed into something far more important than anyone could have imagined. The Earth Archive occupied a massive space station that had been constructed at the exact coordinates where humanity's homeworld had once orbited the sun. Every species in the galactic community had contributed resources and technology to create a living memorial that would preserve not just human history, but the lessons they had taught through their final sacrifice. The construction of the archive had been surprisingly swift, driven by a galaxy-wide recognition that humanity's legacy needed to be preserved and studied. Dr. Helen Carter, one of only 300 humans who had survived the battle by being stationed on deep space research facilities, had worked closely with Lyrali to design a facility that would serve both as a memorial and as a center for learning about human approaches to impossible problems. Commander Zara Vex arrived at the archive regularly to conduct training sessions with military officers from dozens of different species. The Galactic Council had established new military protocols based on human tactical innovations, teaching traditional forces how to incorporate controlled chaos and emotional decision-making into their strategic planning. The sessions were difficult for most species to master, as they required abandoning logical approaches that had been developed over thousands of years of galactic warfare. The archive's central hall contained holographic displays showing the final battle, with detailed analysis of how human tactics had succeeded where conventional warfare would have failed. Visitors could observe how Captain Rosa Martinez had used sudden emotional decisions to confuse the entity's predictive systems, or how General Amanda Pierce had coordinated ground operations using intuition rather than calculated strategy. The displays made it clear that human success had not been accidental, but the result of deliberate training in the use of chaos as a weapon. Dr. Carter spent most of her time in the archive's research section, working with scientists from multiple species to document human approaches to problem-solving that could be applied to other challenges. Her work revealed that humanity's greatest strength had not been their technology or their courage, but their willingness to embrace uncertainty and make decisions based on incomplete information. This ability, which other species had considered a weakness, had proven to be the key to defeating an enemy that could adapt to any logical approach. Lyreley had been officially appointed as the archive's primary guardian, responsible for ensuring that human culture and knowledge would be preserved for future generations. She spent her days teaching visitors about human art, literature, and philosophy, helping them understand the mindset that had made humanity's final sacrifice possible. The most difficult part of her work was explaining to logical species how humans had found strength in their own unpredictability. The archive's educational programs attracted students from across the galaxy, all eager to learn what humans called thinking outside the box. Young Scifi, who had been raised on ancient wisdom and careful planning, struggled to understand how humans made effective decisions based on sudden hunches. Zephyrian telepaths found it nearly impossible to comprehend how humans had functioned without the ability to share thoughts directly, yet had somehow developed more creative solutions to problems than any species with mental linking abilities. One of the most popular sections of the archive contained recordings of Chancellor Ruby North's speeches about humanity's role in galactic civilization. North had been a human political leader who had understood that her species was different from others, and had encouraged humans to embrace their role as what she called the galaxy's wild card. Her speeches revealed that humans had always known they were unpredictable and had chosen to view this trait as a responsibility rather than a flaw. Dr. Carter had discovered that human military training had included specific courses in what they called beneficial chaos, teaching soldiers and officers how to make decisions that would be impossible for logical minds to predict, while still achieving strategic objectives. These training methods were now being adapted for use by other species, though the results varied significantly depending on each race's psychological makeup and cultural background. The archive's most solemn area was the memorial chamber, where the names of every human who had participated in the final battle were inscribed on crystalline walls that stretched higher than most visitors could see. Admiral Vera Cross's name held the place of honor at the center of the display, surrounded by the names of the millions of humans who had followed her into what they knew would be their final confrontation. Nina Torres had established a special program for military academies throughout the galaxy, bringing cadets to the archive to study human battle records and learn how emotional decision-making could be incorporated into tactical planning. The program emphasized that the goal was not to make other species act like humans, but to help them understand when logic needed to be supplemented by intuition and when careful planning needed to be abandoned in favor of immediate action. The most unexpected development had been the establishment of human protocols in civilian government and business throughout the galaxy. Organizations had begun appointing chaos consultants, whose job was to identify when traditional approaches were failing and suggest alternatives based on human problem-solving methods. These consultants were trained to ask the kinds of questions humans would have asked and to propose solutions that logical minds would normally reject. As Lyreley watched a group of young aliens practicing human-style decision-making exercises, she reflected on how much the galaxy had changed since Earth fell silent. The loss of humanity had been devastating, but their sacrifice had taught every other species lessons that might prove crucial if similar threats ever appeared in the future. The archive ensured that human knowledge would survive, even though the species itself was gone. Dr. Carter joined Lyreley in the observation area, and together they watched as their students struggled to master the art of controlled chaos that had been as natural as breathing to humans. It was slow progress, but progress nonetheless, and both women knew that humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy was not the technology they had developed or the battles they had won, but the example they had set of how to face impossible odds with determination and hope. The galaxy had learned that sometimes the most important heroes are the ones who refuse to follow the rules, who make decisions based on heart rather than head, and who are willing to sacrifice everything for others. Earth had fallen silent, but its voice echoed louder than ever through the species it had saved and the lessons it had taught about the power of the human spirit.